Have you ever felt overwhelmed by a problem that seemed impossible to solve? This is the story of a widow whose faith and obedience unlocked God's miraculous provision. Found in 2 Kings 4:17, it reminds us that no matter how small our resources may seem, God can use them to do extraordinary things. Our story begins with a widow in ancient Israel, devastated after her husband's death. He had been a prophet and a faithful servant of God, but now she is left with nothing but a crushing debt. In those times, creditors could legally take her sons as slaves to repay what was owed. Imagine her desperation, a grieving widow on the brink of losing her children. With no one else to turn to, she cries out to Elisha, the prophet of God, seeking help. Her plea is not just for financial relief. It's a cry to save her family from being torn apart. Elisha listens to the widow and asks a pivotal question: "What do you have in your house?" Her answer reveals the depth of her poverty. "Your servant has nothing at all except a small jar of olive oil." It's a moment of truth. What she sees as insignificant, a mere jar of oil, becomes the starting point for a miracle. This teaches us an important lesson. God often begins with what we already have, no matter how small or insufficient it may seem. Elisha then gives an unusual instruction. He tells the widow to borrow as many empty jars as she can from her neighbors. Not a few, he emphasizes, but as many as possible. Imagine the scene. The widow and her sons go door to door, asking for jars, not knowing exactly why. This requires faith, humility, and even boldness. Elisha then instructs her to shut the door and begin pouring her small amount of oil into the jars. It must have sounded absurd, but the widow obeys without hesitation. Her faith and obedience set the stage for a miracle. As the widow pours, something miraculous happens. The oil flows continuously, filling every jar to the brim. Jar after jar is filled, and the oil only stops when there are no more jars left. This miracle shows the unlimited power of God's provision. The small jar of oil was enough to fill every borrowed jar, demonstrating that God's supply is only limited by our capacity to receive. This moment is a beautiful picture of God's abundance. He takes what we offer in faith and multiplies it beyond what we can imagine. Elisha's final instruction to the widow is practical and wise. Go, sell the oil, and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left. This not only frees her from the immediate crisis, but also provides ongoing security for her family. God's provision meets both her urgent and long-term needs. Through this miracle, the widow's faith is rewarded, her family is preserved, and her future is secured. What can we take away from this story? Here are 5 powerful lessons. God's abundant provision. God can multiply even the smallest resources to meet your needs. Faith and obedience. The widow trusted God and acted on his instructions, even when they seemed illogical. Partnership with God. The widow played an active role in the miracle, borrowing jars, pouring oil, and selling it. God often calls us to take part in his plans. The role of community. The neighbors who lent jars became part of God's provision. This reminds us of the importance of community support. God's care for the vulnerable. This story shows that no one is too small or insignificant for God to help. Are you facing a situation where resources feel scarce or solutions seem impossible? Trust that God can work through whatever you have, no matter how small. Take steps of faith, obey his instructions, and watch how he provides in ways beyond your imagination. This story reminds us that God's blessings often meet immediate needs while securing a better future. Trust him, act in faith, and let him show you his power. Thank you for joining us in exploring this powerful story of faith and provision. If this message encouraged you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Let's walk together in faith and trust in God's abundant provision.